Welcome to the DJ's Powerup podcast, and I'm joined today with Dan, and Dan hails all the way from Alberta, Canada. He's a fellow YouTube content creator. He has experience as a sound engineer and a mobile DJ. And thank you for joining us, Dan.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So, were you a sound engineer first or a DJ?
I started off doing the sound engineer thing. It was the classic. My band needed speakers, so I picked up a set, figured out how to make them work. Kept going from there. Got some gigs doing that and whatnot, and then started doing a little bit of DJing here and there, and that grew. And now I tend to do that more than general performing.
Very nice. Yeah, I think it's a very common scenario. Somebody has to do it. When I was in a band, I didn't want to deal with that. The drummer had to do it, and a drummer being the sound guy on top of it was terrible. He had so much gear. I didn't envy him. But then he ended up getting me into DJing, so here I am today. So what is one of your favorite things about being a DJ in Canada?
In Canada, one of my favorite things about it is a bit random. I do a lot of weddings and things like that, but because I'm one of the few DJs in my area, because I'm in a smaller town, I get a lot of random little gigs. Like next week, I'm doing a drag show at a Legion. The week after, I'm at a curling rink. Like it's just a little all over the place, and they're all a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Are you a solo op or are you a multi-op?
Solo op at the moment. Every now and then I subcontract somebody in if I can't make it, but working towards being a multi-op just because doing the live sound thing, I have so many sets of speakers and mixer boards and all that I have the equipment to run more than one. So we're aiming this summer. I've got a few people training up as assistants that if they can manage it, we'll send them out on a few gigs on their own, which is going to be a little nerve-wracking, but looking forward to it. So,
well, that's pretty cool. Yeah, if you have the equipment being used makes you more money, so it just makes logical sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you're doing like the live sound and DJing simultaneously, trying to do both.
Yeah. Which they have a lot in common, especially equipment-wise. There's a lot of like even the lighting aspects that a lot of par cans and stuff. So every now and then I get a call to do sound and lighting, and it's we're set, we're equipped, we're good to go. So works well.
Nice. I think one of the big differences between like band lighting and DJ lighting is like band lighting, a big part is to light up the band because the band's more of a spectacle, but a lot of times we don't light up the DJ.
That's true. We tend to have ourselves blend in a bit more behind it and whatnot, but I've often I do like backlighting myself a bit from time to time, if depending on the event, right? Like oftentimes we're not the center of attention, especially if you're doing a wedding. Your job is to make sure the bride and groom, everybody's eyes are on them. So fading into the background is just fine, but there's some events where it's nice to stand out.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like creating a spectacle adds value, like it adds like entertainment value to the guest, which ultimately goes back to the bride and groom. So like people will put like pars like on their like facades or their totems, which I think is great. But I just kind of find it funny that like very few DJs will actually have like a spot shining on them overhead like a band would do. Because I think that's like one of the first things I would think as a band lighting is to get some pars and pointing them on the band on either corner.
Maybe you'll start the trend. Get that going.
I don't know. I'm pretty happy with the way things are. But yeah, maybe that is a good idea to get started, especially because a lot of DJs are doing really cool mashups and they're getting notoriety and like TikTok, and people are filming and people love the transitions. So maybe we do need more lighting on them. What is one of the challenges of being a DJ in Canada?
Well, like I mentioned, the small town aspect, and it depends a bit. I believe are you was it Utah? Did I see that right in one of your videos?
Out of Salt Lake City, Utah.
Okay, yeah. So you, depending on where some people are located, because I know down in the States, like your population is much larger than ours. I can't remember if technically we have more land in the end. So a lot of gigs,
Close.
like it's it's sometimes a 2 hour drive to get where you need to be, just because it'll be a few towns over, and those few towns over, there's a lot of farms in between. So that's often the challenge, is because the town that I'm in, uh, I quite like the events that I do here, but they're not quite enough to sustain. So I have to branch out, and yeah, some of that you're putting a lot of miles on those tires. So
Yeah, I get that. I actually live like in a rural town outside of Salt Lake City, but luckily for me, most of my gigs are within 30 minutes to 1 hour. And I'm a preferred vendor at one of the venues just down the street from me, and I love gigging there, but it doesn't happen very often. The budgets often don't align, but
yeah, you got to love that 5 minute drive home at 1 o'clock is a lot better than the hour and a half.
it sure is. Oh my gosh, I freaking love it. And if you forget a cable, it's not like end of the world. It's like, oh, let me just drive home real quick.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. But we make the drive because we love DJing. So one of the criticisms of DJs is that they don't follow best sound engineering practices and are choosing form over function with like the equipment they choose. So what are some of the common mistakes that you see DJs make?
I see a lot of them. And in defense of DJs, and I mean, even like I came across your channel because I was looking to learn more about DMX and particularly sound switch. DJs generally know more about running lighting than any of the sound technicians I've ever worked with. So the fact that we have to do the performing, the audio, and the lighting, oftentimes that means your knowledge base gets a little bit scattered. But there's some basics that tend to get missed. One of the biggest ones: more speakers doesn't mean more better. I've seen frequently where somebody will have, they'll have their column arrays, they'll have some point sources above that, and then underneath those, they have their big subs. And if you actually do the math, those point sources are doing 90+% of your work. And then your column arrays are just comb filtering your sound and making everything sound worse, even though the logic in the head is this will sound louder. The column arrays are better in these frequencies, but the point sources are better in these. When you double your sound source, you're only actually getting 3 decibels of increased volume. So bringing those column arrays to add extra oomph or whatever, you can get that by just turning the dial up by 3 decibels. And the comb filtering, essentially, when the sound waves hit each other, they're not perfectly in sync. So they'll start to cancel out different frequencies. They don't null perfectly. You can make that happen on your computer if you take like something and you phase invert it on a DAW or whatever. But if you have speakers that are, especially if they're misaligned and whatnot, but even if they're just next to each other, when those sound waves hit, they don't cancel, they cancel out frequencies, and they call it comb filtering because it looks like a shark's mouth. Like there's just all of these frequencies that just vanish. So you're making yourself sound worse in exchange for hauling more equipment. So I did
Lose.
well, exactly. And I did the math once. I think it takes 8 pairs of JBL Eons, or no, so 8 JBL Eons, so 4 pairs to keep up with one of JBL's top of the line speakers, like for point source. So you're drawing more power and you're taking up more space in the van and you're hauling more stuff, and it's more money in the end. It's one of those things, and I mean I get it, right? Like I own 6 sets of speakers right now, and
Nice.
it's just a case of, in my case, I need them for floor monitors and things like that. But if you have them, it's like, oh, it's a bigger event. Instead of going out and renting or buying bigger speakers, I'm just going to bring more. And there's a place for that, right? If you tilt them at the right angles, if you have the ability to put them elsewhere in the room and then time align and things like that. But most DJ rigs just aren't equipped to do that. So you can really save your back. Something I always recommend, I've been messing around with a lot recently. I don't know. Have you ever seen Ease Focus 3?
I have not seen Ease Focus 3.
It's a great piece of free software that lets you real time map like you can put the dimensions of a venue and you can set speakers in it and set what decibel they're playing at. And it'll actually show you, it kind of looks like a heat grid. It'll show you how that's going to, like, what volume your average is going to be across the room. And it works really well because one of the other problems I often see with subwoofers, the closer they are together, the better. But the mindset of a lot of DJs is I'm going to spread my speakers out for coverage. But if you have your subwoofers within, I think it's 7 feet, depending on the frequency, of the center of the cone, then they actually couple and you get a free 3 decibels of volume. So it's the opposite of those top speakers where they start to interfere with each other. If you have them close, you're actually getting free volume, which you have to double your wattage to get 3 decibels normally. So if you're running 2,000 watt subwoofers, you would need 2,000 watt subwoofers to get what you do if you just put them close to each other. But the mindset is like, oh, the further apart they are, the more of the room they cover up. And like, especially if you're doing school gyms and things like that, shove those things together. And I kind of get it though, like having them spaced out and having that uniform, that mirrored look. It's not the end of the world, but if you have them a little further apart, you start to do something called a power alley. And if you look at that on something like Ease Focus 3, you can actually visually see it because it's hard to hear it at the venue unless you really know how to walk it and hear it. But it basically turns the dance floor into this big pot leaf where you've got all of these alleys where it'll be quite a bit of bass. And then these gaps that it can drop as much as 10 decibels, which to the human ear is half the volume. So depending on where people are in the room, now, thankfully, chances are it's going to be fine on the dance floor because usually those alleys are further away. So it's not the end of the world, but it's just one of those things where the idea is, oh, if I space these speakers out more, I'll get more coverage. You actually will get a better overall volume having them closer together when it comes to your subwoofers, which is counterintuitive because your top speakers need to be further apart.
Yeah, as mobile DJs, sometimes a lot of things are compromised because, a lot of times these venues aren't optimized to have like a DJ performer. So we gotta think of that. But if you have like the ability to optimize it, and like if like placement doesn't matter as much, like if you're on a stage and your speakers are gonna go on the ground, then yeah, might as well get some free extra dB and get some better sound.
Exactly. And yeah, like sometimes you just got to work with what you got when it comes to the venue. I was at one, I think it was 2 years ago, where they had me up on a stage and I had my speakers up, but they had a lip that was coming down where all of the stages, like par cans and stuff for when they ran events were at. So I had this essentially wall that my high frequencies were slamming into and then echoing back at me. And I could hear my snare drum perfectly clear, but a good, probably it was enough of like, if you've ever had OBS running and you accidentally turn the monitoring on, you can hear yourself like you wouldn't expect it to be too distracting, but it's just that those batch of milliseconds, it was just I had to headphones at all times because hearing what was in the room did not work.
Yeah, that would be difficult for sure. Yeah, those are great tips. So as far as like those column array speakers, which I personally love, do you have any tips for people using those column arrays?
So the trick with column arrays, and full disclosure, this is coming from somebody who uses point source for most of their speakers, but I've worked with those in the past. Like I'm planning on getting a set myself. It's hard to stomach buying them just because I have a bunch of sets of point source and stuff because that's just what I already own. But they look so good. I want a set because like
So good.
the looks do matter, especially when it comes to DJing. When it comes to live sound, nobody really cares as long as it's not distracting. The band, if they know that that is going to make them sound better, they're just going to live with whatever you're setting up. But those column arrays, you want to treat them like a point source. They essentially, the array with the sub turns them into basically a very wide distributed wide distributing point source speaker. And I've heard a lot of people, especially I think you have Evolve 50s? Was that I know you're an
I do
EV
have
fan.
Evolve
Yeah.
50s. Yep.
I've seen a lot of people where they'll take those and they'll kick them out a little bit because they are such a wide distribution that you can get a lot of comb filtering, and just having them out a tad. Now, because they do have the subwoofers built in, that's one of their biggest, the ironic big advantages of the column arrays is you'll always get more volume out of even just a set of regular point sources at the same price. But the bass response on the column arrays tends to be better because they have a subwoofer sitting on the floor, even if it's a smaller sub. So because, like, going back to the previous tips, if you spread them out too much, now those subwoofers are giving you their power alleys. If you put them too close together, now you're getting a bit of interference and getting those comb filtering. So having them a little closer together, kicked out a little bit. I've heard from some other sound techs that they've had really good luck with that. Most of the time I've dealt with the column array speakers, it's been for acoustic acts and things like that, where they just have one setup. Because I think that was the main idea behind when they first came up with them, is you'll have one of these and it's going to fill a room really, really well because it has big dispersion, decent volume for what you're hauling in. And then a lot of them, even the older ones, all had built-in mixers across the back, right? The ones I'm looking at right now, they have built-in reverb on the channels and 2 mic channels and then extra lines in. So for very small events, I don't even have to bring a mixer board because there's one built into the back.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, only 2 microphones for live events tends to be a little bit low. But if I know in advance that's all I need, then less stuff to haul, less cables, it looks better and should sound really good.
Yeah, I think it's the idea of like the singer songwriter acoustic guitar player in mind with like one microphone. And I know like the EVs have like a 6 channel one now too.
Oh yeah, those EVs, I've heard nothing but good things about them. They were on my short list. I'm going with some less expensive options to start, just because I don't need the something that large necessarily. But I've heard nothing but good things.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there weren't so many options like 5, 6 years ago. So now there's all sorts of competition. And for people that aren't needing as much, there's a lot more options out there. So I think that's fabulous.
Well, and especially for mobile DJs, the I know JBL has one, and I think it was Maui, although Maui's a bit less common up here. Um, these battery powered column arrays, I want one so bad for ceremonies, because like they send sound everywhere, they sound really good, they're basically invisible, and with the mixer on the back, that's just going to make your life so easy for ceremony work. I've got a JBL sitting in a shopping cart for someday when I can justify it.
Yeah, I have the first generation of the JBLs, and it's been amazing. It's literally just one speaker, like the top folds into like the sub, and so you just drop it where you need to for the ceremony, and then you set it up, and yeah, it's so elegant. It's a 6 channel mixer. It's awesome. And luckily, I was able to get it on sale because they were closing out, getting ready for like the second generation. So
There you
I
go.
I
Yeah.
highly recommend it. It's a great speaker. I think a lot
And
of
well,
people were frustrated with it because it wasn't a good like main speaker for a main dance party, but
It's
And
okay.
and again, that's kind of like the original older designs of them. They weren't really made with DJs in mind. They thought this is going to be for your singer songwriter who wants, like, a lot of them used to use like the little acoustic guitar amps. All of
Yep.
those have like a microphone jack built into them, because then you can bring this to your smaller gigs and your set. And there was nothing kind of in between. It was go straight to a full size PA system, or you go to the little guy, and that's it. Where they, I think it was Bose that came up with the first variant of these. I can't remember if there might be somebody else. Someone in the comments will mention, because they have better memories than me. But yeah, they really were marketed towards the musician side of it, and then now they've really caught on. Like, most of the musicians I know are actually selling them off to buy bigger PA systems as they get bigger events and stuff. I don't know why, because honestly, I tell everybody two other tips, two bonus tips for the listeners out there. One,
Awesome.
rent first. If if you cannot afford a good set of speakers and you're trying to get started, just rent. If you have the option, right? Obviously, I live in a small town. I am the rental company in my small town. I couldn't have done it. Like, there was nobody I could go to for a set of speakers. But I had people coming to me even before I owned my store and stuff, where, hey, I hear you have a set of speakers. Can I rent it on Friday? And that is better than going on Amazon and sort by lowest price and what can I find, because you're not going to like your results. Where if you just build in an extra, this $50 of this gig is on the bill is for the PA system, and I know that in my head, so I don't feel bad about, oh man, I could have made an extra $50. You know that you're going to have a better sound in the end. So highly recommend, if you can just rent first, you can do a few gigs, save up from those gigs, buy a system of your own, rather than, scraping it by to get, a first small system and then you sell it in a few months and you buy a bigger one. But if you are shopping used, trust me, used, especially for subwoofers. Oh man, they take up so much space that people clear them out for next to nothing, especially older passive stuff. I'm about to go buy, hopefully, pending my cold doesn't keep me home today. There's a guy, it's a bit of a drive, but he's got two older Yorkville 18-inch subs, and conversion wise, they're probably sitting about like $280 American for the pair. And
Wow, that is
yeah,
a deal.
exactly. And I happen to have an amplifier that can run them. That's something also to keep an eye out. Amplifiers have not gone down very much in price. So it's almost always a better deal if you're buying new right now to go powered speakers. But if you're on the used market, you can find, like, I have a set of EVs. Here in Canada, they're normally about $550 each. And I found a pair with an amplifier for $450 that it was being used by a magician, which was weird. I got to his house and he's showing me all of his like trapeze stuff he's got tucked in the tucked in his garage and whatnot. But I know these speakers are like, they barely were used. Amplifier was in perfect shape. Filters, like air filters on it, were even clean. And it was like $450 for the speakers and the amp. And it's a great system. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of times too is DJs, like, we value convenience because we're mobile performers, we're in and out, and convenience is super important. And I know back in the day there was like debates between like active versus passive systems, but I think that the industry by and large, no one's talking about passive systems anymore. I think that they
Yeah.
have their place for bigger outdoor events, especially when the weather might not be the greatest, because active systems can like overheat and stuff. And I think that's a big reason why people have gone to column arrays, even though it costs more money for like less sound. Like, when I was first starting, like, me and a friend, we both bought a sound system. I got the Evolve 50s. He got a full ETX system, like 18-inch subs and 12-inch tops. And he was just his logic, which I think is a good reasoning, is he's like, this bigger system will be able to handle any sort of event that comes my way. And then mine was that most of the events I do are like smaller weddings, so these will be perfect for these. And after a year, I lent him my speakers for a smaller wedding, and he realized that the convenience was there, and they were so nice to set up, so he ended up buying himself a pair. But then I ended
Yeah.
up buying myself a bigger system too, because sometimes it wasn't enough.
Yeah,
And
and you kind of that is something to keep in mind. Like that is my mindset is actually closer to your friends, where because of the other styles of gig that I do, it just made more sense. And like I said, I need stage monitors. Now, a dedicated stage wedge where it's at that nice angle, that will work better for a stage monitor than a speaker on its side, even if it is designed to be sat on its side as a stage monitor. But, well, I'd rather have okay stage monitors and 2 extra sets of speakers for 2 extra gigs, right? Like I found recently a bunch of passive Yorkville 15-inch speakers for like $100 each. And
Wow.
again, I've got like a powered mixer I found for used and stuff and wired it together. And now I've got this system that cost me less than, it was $600 for two tops and 2 stage monitors. Like
Wow.
couldn't ask for more, but they also, both sets of those double as like a full system on their own. I know a lot of DJs out there at Subwoofer or Bust. I'm not one of those guys. I'm also not doing a lot of EDM or, like if I'm playing hip hop, it's my system might be a little bit lacking, but I do have a sub that I bring out for bigger events. But I find a good set of 12s or 15s, if you're not pushing them too hard, they should be putting out enough bass. But yeah, sub, when I do get if I get a bigger gig and I've got a 212 subwoofer that I love the thing. Every time I get a chance to bring it out, I do. But I also like my back, so it stays where it is more often than it probably should.
so, what advice do you have to people looking? Because I know there's a lot of people looking to buy like their first subwoofer. And my experience was I bought some like 15-inch Behringers, and holy crap, they were heavy. They were about 100 pounds a piece, and they weren't very loud, and they didn't sound very good. So, what advice would you give to people looking to buy like their first subwoofer?
Unfortunately, number one thing is they're almost always going to be heavy. There's really no way around it. They can't do a plastic enclosure like they do on top speakers. You have to have, birch or plywood in general is going to be usually better than MDF from a durability standpoint. If you get an MDF speaker wet, best of luck to you. They're not designed for that. Like if you've ever had a friend who's had like a flooded basement and they have IKEA furniture, they will attest to you want good good quality on the wood side. But the big thing I'd recommend, like the two big things, again, used is a really good way to go budget wise, because you can get a very good sub for usually half what you would pay if you go and buy it new. And chances are, if you're buying a used better subwoofer, it's going to be louder. So you're going to get the volume. It's going to make it feel worth it to haul it. The other big thing is learn how to read spec sheets. They're not the end all be all. It's a bit annoying because every company rates their spec sheets differently, and it drives me nuts. Like EV, on some of their subwoofers and some of their speakers, they will give you the actual, like, here's how we figured out the SPL. We put a dB meter a foot away. We cranked the thing up. We ran this frequency through it. This is what we got before clipping, like that kind of thing. And EV is actually really good for that. But there's a lot of other companies where it'll just say calculated. And now I say this as somebody who owns QSC speakers. I've got a set of QSC tops. They're my favorite tops, especially when I'm dealing with bands.
They sound great. I love
They're
QSC.
they're awesome. Their spec sheets are garbage. Not only, for some reason, their frequency response, almost every company does plus or minus 3, which is like here's the narrow window where everything's kind of here, and then they'll show you frequency range, which is plus minus 10. For some reason, QSC, I don't know when it happened. I think it was around the K12.2, maybe. I can't remember. They moved to plus minus 6. So you can't compare their frequency chart to anybody else. And Mackie does this now too. So I can't just finger wag at QSC. The SPL is calculated. And if you look at the fine print, it's calculated without taking into account the limiter. So they'll have these subwoofers that have a built-in limiter, which is good. You want one of those, right? It prevents you from blowing the thing up.
Protect your speaker.
Yeah, but the SPL that they have listed is as if that is not like speaker protection removed from circuit. And it's like, okay, so this is now an imaginary number.
Yeah.
Because you can't actually get it there. It's not peak that it can only get for a split second, which is also continuous. If you don't know, again, if you don't know how to read spec sheets, learn. It is very useful. But as I'm saying this now, it's becoming less useful. And I recently bought a pair of, I think it was Wharfdale, and I was actually really, really happy with their spec sheet. They tell you the sensitivity of their active speakers, which you normally don't get that information anymore. Mackie used to do it. They don't anymore. But you can actually calculate out using the wattage and whatnot to see, are they actually telling me the truth? And what will I get if I'm running them at like half power? Oh, that's still actually pretty good, because then you know how much you're actually pushing the thing. But yeah, when it comes to subs, it's for me, bonus tip, because I like to rant. For me, it's 12 or 18 or bust. 15s can sound good, but I find I get a lot better punch out of a 12, right? Like if you actually want to hear the kick drum, a good dual 12. I love dual 12s. You'll be able to hear it a lot better. An 18 usually will get you the volume and it'll get you those low frequencies. A 15 is kind of in between, and in my experience, it's kind of just not as good as either. Where a dual 12 has the actual surface area of the woofers, when you add the two 12s together, I believe they sit in between a 15 and an 18. So they have more surface area than a 15. So you actually tend to get a bit better low frequency response out of a dual 12 while still getting that punchier upper bass that, like I said, I do a lot of live sound, so my needs are a little bit different. For most DJs out there, an 18, dual 18s for big events, put those together, like I said earlier, for if you're doing a school dance or something like that, there's kind of no substitute for a couple big bass bins. But yeah, unfortunately, they're always going to be heavy. That heavy is often good, because that usually means better quality wood, better quality magnets going on. Although some of these new ones actually have dropped a lot in volume. My bass guitar rig weighs next to nothing, because I picked up these, I think they're called bass lights from Eminence, and they're using the neodymium magnets, and they weigh so much less than traditional magnets. And yeah, they still push. So there's a lot of options out there. But yeah, like I said, I'd also, in terms of spec sheets, second bonus or third, I don't know, my brain's everywhere. Wattage on subwoofers is really overrated, and I don't just mean that in terms of that peak versus actual like performance level in terms of watts. But like the subs that I'm gonna hopefully pick up today, they put out, I think it's 127 decibels at 500 watts, and that's pretty darn good. They can handle technically 1,000, but I'm going to be running about 500. And there's a lot of subwoofers out there where they'll say that they can put out like 130 dB, but that's at peak. and they'll be running at 1,000 watts, putting out 127 or so. So do check what the actual volume output they can do is. Like, don't just look at the wattage. Wattage is very it's a useful tool, but it's not the end all be all. And again, unfortunately, these companies measure the max SPL in different ways. So you can't just compare. I'm going to compare JBL to EV to QSC and just look at the spec sheets. It just unfortunately doesn't work that way. It should, but it doesn't.
It should. That is right. And so another thing, no, you're leaving so many awesome bonus tips, and this has been very useful, and I'm very excited about this episode. Um, so another thing that DJs are always asking is, should DJs use an external mixer, and what are the benefits? Because a lot of DJs will take their controller and plug it directly into their speakers, and then others will have like a 6-channel mixer in between that.
There are a lot of benefits. Now, like we were talking about earlier, if you've got something like the Evolve 50s where you have a full mixer across the back, not as big of a deal. And it also depends on the controller you're using, right? If you're running, I think it's like the Rev 7 now from Pioneer. That thing, I think you can put multiple microphones into it with EQs for each mic. I know I used to have an SX3, and that's one of the reasons I got it, was it had multiple mic inputs and they had an equalizer for each channel. So that's the first thing you need to ask is, if I plug a microphone in here, can I EQ it? Because that to me is worth having the extra mixer if you can't. There are workarounds. So if you have, say, a set of wireless mics, mine have a mix out on the wireless. So if I'm doing a small gig, oftentimes I use a Mixstream Pro from Newmark, and its EQ, it would be global then, but I can still EQ my mics plural and then control the volume knobs. So it'd be better if I had 2 mic inputs because I could do it separately. So that's the first thing I would check is, like, do you have EQ for your mics? And if you don't, then I would highly recommend a outboard mixer. And then if your speakers don't have a mixer themselves to adjust different levels and whatnot, you're probably better off with the outboard, especially like if you're running, say, like an SB3, although I think those are discontinued. Any of the Newmark mixed track stuff where it's RCA outs, having a mixer in between is often really, really nice. Plus, then you can have your iPad or even your, you take your phone and get the stupid adapter because they don't have headphone jacks anymore. And you run that in, and then, oh no, my system, like my computer's crashing. What am I going to do? You throw a song on here and quickly reset everything. The audience is none the wiser. Where if you have everything running through, like that SX3 that I had, I sold it because up where I'm living, we do good old Celsius here. I don't know what would be in Fahrenheit, but I had a few weddings that I had to go to that were it was plus 40 out.
That's over 100 degrees. 38 is 100 degrees, and that's hot.
It was, and I went to the venue. I flipped on my SX3, and there must have been a bad solder joint somewhere in there that was like swelling and shrinking depending on temperature, because I would flip it on and it would sound like gunshots coming up my speakers. And so what do I? And I thought it was my computer for the longest time, because I had an okay computer plugged into what I thought was like a very, like, I've never owned a DJ controller this expensive. This thing has to be that, it cannot be the problem, and it was. And it's not a known problem with the SX300 thing. It was like that's very specific one, but every time that would happen, I had everything plugged into it. So I started having to bring an outboard mixer anytime I used that thing, until I sold it to somebody. I told them about the problem. It's like, hey, this is why it's this cheap. And he's like, well, I'm using it in my bedroom. It'll be fine. But I always had to have an outboard mixer, because if I didn't, and that problem happened, all of a sudden I'm ripping cables out the back and, doing the RCA 1/8 inch to XLR splitter, which is never the bet. Like you should have one of those. If you don't have one of those cables, have one of those in your bag. But it
Yep.
never works as good as going through in a separate mixer. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind. But yeah, a separate mixer can be a really good idea, but it's not always necessary. Because yeah, the back of your speaker, oh, my controller died. Plug everything straight into the back of the speaker, and you can limp by for the rest of the event. And like people are. It sucks. It's stressful. But your clients, if you tell them like, yeah, no, I've got a backup, and you can even like, I always tell my clients about my backup system of like, yeah, and like the back of the speaker. If somebody spills a beer on my console or something like that, I can go and I can plug into the back of it. So if they see you scrambling, they know, and they also then they have that added bit of security of like, oh, the guy we hired, he's already thought through that. If a bunch of stuff happens, he has backups upon backups, right? Like I bring a wired microphone to every gig, even though I often use wireless, just because if something goes wrong, plug it straight in, like whether it's into the mixer or back to the speaker, whatever, I can make sure that the event goes on without too much of a hiccup.
No, I think it's good to have backups, backup workflows. I mean, I've heard of guys like having like a cloned system, like the same speakers and mixer like in their car, which I think if that's what you want to do, great. But like just being able to work through it and being able to make the show go on is like the most important. Like
Yeah.
I don't know, I heard of a story recently where there was a photo booth vendor, not a DJ luckily, where they were missing a part for the photo booth and they just told the client like, show can't go on, I don't have the part. You're sorry, out of luck. And so the event planner was like scrambling and asking like, is there a photo booth available this very second to come replace them? And it was too late at that point. So
It's something I've heard, and DJs in my area, this, although I think this is a lot of places too, DJs, photo booth, like there's a lot of these companies that they're a bit fly by night. It's like I've even heard of a wedding photographer who they booked a bunch of gigs and then they decided it wasn't for them and they just left everybody high and dry. And like that stuff happens.
What, mid gig?
Yeah, no, they just didn't show up to them, didn't tell them they were quitting, and they just right. And now there's a reason we have contracts. Like I learned this the hard way. When you start off as a DJ, if you're taking this seriously, have it in a contract and take a deposit. Your clients actually will feel better that they have a deposit down than, oh, we don't have to do a deposit. This guy's great. No, they want to hand you that deposit because then they know you're showing up. But I've heard of DJs not showing up. I've heard of DJs leaving like there was a venue nearby me here where their DJ got their hair wet and was like, well, I gotta go. My hair's wet. I can't work like this. And it's, what are you talking about? It's raining. Of course your hair is wet. Like what are you doing? And thankfully they had a musician on hand who they plugged him into something and he kept the night going. But they were like, yeah, this was a disaster. Like the DJ just up and left. So if you're better than that, guys, the bar is nice and low. Show up on time, do your job, and be sober, and you'll be step above a lot of people, unfortunately, in the industry. It's but yeah, I strive to be above. Don't do the bare minimum, but it's. You can rest assured if you think
but
you're
at least do the bare minimum. At least
exactly show up and on time, early, or like the old if you're on time, you're late. That stands true on any of this type of stuff. Any sound gig, any performance gig, right? If you're only showing up 5 minutes before you're supposed to be on stage, you've given someone a heart attack. Like that's how it works.
Do you test your speakers, like to do a sound check at every gig or some of your gigs?
It depends. Like I do a little bit of like EQ and stuff depending on the set of speakers. So sometimes I'll like I almost always walk out into where the crowd would be to hear how it's sounding, because you can never tell from behind. From behind, because of the way that bass works, you're gonna like my speakers, I always think they're way louder than they actually are, because when I'm behind them, all I'm hearing is the bass, and it's like, oh man, there's so much. And then I walk out front, and it's like, oh, okay, there's the full range sound. That's what it's actually sounding like. I actually have some room to turn up. So yeah, I make sure though, anytime if you're ever using it, like integrating a new piece of equipment into your system, put your system together at home or at your shop or wherever you keep your stuff, because you don't want to get there and find out that like, oh, like I get a ground loop or something when I put this thing into this, or I've completely forgot, like one of my mixers, I always forget this, that it has TRS outputs. And if I don't bring my TRS to XLR adapters, then it's a pain to hook up in anything. So you have to remember things like that. So yeah, like checking, like testing your gear out ahead of time and making sure that certain things are the way you want it is always a good idea. But my main rig is to a point now where it's plug and play. Like I've got a set of powered tops. I've got a like I said, I've got my Mixstream Pro. I love that thing, especially because like the engine lighting is indispensable. That's like it's
Very nice.
I love it. Like I've got sound switch on my computer, but having it on that touchscreen, it's just very, very handy. But yeah, like I've done some gigs where I show up XLR out to each side. I'm set. I'm ready to go. That's all I need. But if you're tinkering, if you're messing around with stuff, if you're changing your settings and things like that, test it out, right? And I mean, I do a sound check, but thankfully most, like if you're already doing cocktail hour, for example, and you're using the same system, there's your sound check, right? But I'm not going to plug everything in and hope everything's going to be working for the first dance and just hit play. That's yeah, you should definitely test it before that.
And I recommend that too with your lighting. I have lots of people ask me, like, they're wanting to make sure that their lighting will work before wedding season. It's like, have you plugged it in? Have you tried it? Have you tried running sound switch? And a lot of the times the answer is no. They're just hoping to show up, set it all up, and have it work. Yeah, take these things at home, do a dry run, do another dry run.
When especially with lighting, because like if you're new to DMX, home is the best place to make the mistakes. Like you're going to make some errors, both sound wise, DJ wise, lighting wise at the gig. It is going to happen. Nobody's perfect, but oh boy, is fixing an issue before you're actually at the venue is worth its weight in gold. Especially when it comes to lights. Like I have a set of, I found these like really inexpensive PAR lights that I gave a chance to, and I really like them. But for some reason, they do not like any form of DMX over USB. I've tried them with a few different adapters, and they just flicker on and off, no matter what setting I have on. And yeah, if I just went thinking, oh yeah, no, these will work, like I wouldn't have had any lighting. They're just designed, like they have DMX in on the back. If I'm using a old school DMX controller with the, that classic faders across the front, that's
faders and knobs, yeah.
I still have one, but oh boy, do I not miss it. But it works with those, doesn't work with sound switch. Or I was using if anybody out there is super cheap, Freestyler. Great, especially
Freestyler.
Yeah, I use Freestyler a bit still for live band stuff, but I'm starting to get a little more used to using sound switch for those situations too. Because if you know how to manipulate sound switch manually, you can make it work. But yeah, engine lighting though, mwah, it's wonderful.
For me, I feel like engine lighting is almost like what the Control One needs to be like for the next iteration. Like that touch screen is like super intuitive. A touch screen to like control like your movers is wow. I'm blown away.
My hopes for Sound Switch is deeper integration into their partners, because they like the one thing holding me back from getting DJ Pro is that it doesn't like it can work with Sound Switch through like Ableton Link, but it's not direct.
Right, you'll only be able to trigger the auto loops. You're not going to be able to get the scripted songs.
Exactly. And so I'm hoping they get that, especially with depending on when people are viewing this, like the whole thing with Serato being bought by Alpha Theta and in music being not 100% happy with that. I'm hoping in music starts just getting more in touch with, like, because DJ Pro is on the rise right now. I'm hoping they work something out there, because it would be great to have another software it works with. But I want pad controls, right? I want on my, like, instead of, like, I never use Slicer. Let me turn Slicer into, now when I hit that button, my 8 pads on each side or 4 pads on each side, depending on the controller, are now different auto loops. Or like one of them's up and down on the auto loops, and then I've got, say, whiteout and blackout. Like, just give me 4 buttons on my controller that now integrate into it, and like it'd be so
cool.
great. But I think there's some limitations on that. I actually don't know exactly how the softwares all connect together, so maybe that's way more complicated than I think it is.
I will say that SoundSwitch team, they're working hard. They're having some exciting new features, so I'm excited to see where the future is going. And Algorithm and DJ Pro, they are putting out new features that no one else is doing. So yeah. People at Algorithm, do the OS2L integration, and let's bring SoundSwitch to it.
Yes, it's like I said, I will be a customer. And actually, I don't normally tell people to do this, but trust me, let them know that you want this, right? If you're a DJ user and you want SoundSwitch integrated, if you tell them, like, hey, this would be great if you had this, they do listen, right? They want their client base to be happy. And like, I sent them an email, and now I've got like a ticket, because like with the new iteration of DJ Pro, and like this, they're really cool. What was it, the mapping for the beat grid and whatnot, where it's like flexible, because I play a lot of older country and rock at the weddings and stuff I do. That's just great. That's sweet. I'm like, oh man, all these features. Oh, but it doesn't work with this. So I told them, like, if you put this feature in, you have a customer. And like, I'm gonna, even if I have a different piece of software, I'm probably gonna pick it up if they add it, because I want them to know that, like, no, I got this because you added the feature I want.
Well, awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for meeting with me today. This has been a treasure mine, a gold mine of sound engineering knowledge, and I really appreciate it. Where's the best place that people can follow you?
So for this kind of stuff, good old YouTube. It's Max SPL videos, because Max SPL was taken. Most people call me Max because I have that in the title. But well, yeah, if you follow me on there, yeah, that's and yeah, thanks for having me. This has been great, especially for somebody with a little channel like mine. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'll have a link in the description below. And have a wonderful rest of your day, my friend.
You as well.